Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Katie and I are thoroughly excited to share this interview with you. Dr. Jeff Myers is somebody that I've admired for many years. He is the president of Summit Ministries, and it's a nationally recognized organization. He's really considered an expert when it comes to training young adults with the biblical worldview. He's the author of 19 books. He earned his PhD from the University of Denver, and he lives in Colorado with his wife and family. The book we're primarily going to be talking about in today's episode, though we are going to talk about a variety of other things as well, is his newest book that he co-wrote with Dr. Kathy Koch, and the book is called, or Dr. Cook, I think is actually how you say her name. But this book is called Raising Gender Confident Kids. And so it's something that I think it's one of those topics that I kind of wanted to act like didn't exist with my children. I thought we are immune to this topic. We will raise kids that don't have any issue with this. But through reading his book, listening to these testimonies, I'm realizing that I would be naive, or I have been naive and willingly ignorant surrounding the reality that I will need to equip my kids to engage in this conversation and to have confidence in the gender that God has given them and that they've been born with, and be able to really defend that philosophy and ideology from a biblical standpoint. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave it a rating or a review on iTunes. And if you enjoy any of our episodes, we always appreciate it when you share those on whatever social media platforms you may have, or just a family text thread, or maybe your weekly email out to people. That's how our podcast grows and reaches more people. And it also helps us get guests that we really are excited to have on the show. The more our podcast grows, the more we're able to get access to some just phenomenal thinkers and leaders within the family space, the Christian space. And I know that's a huge privilege for Katie and myself, but we also feel like it's a great way to add value to you, our audience. So with all that said, we will now get this thing going.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Well, Dr. Jeff Myers, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I've really appreciated your work over the years. We're going to be talking primarily about one of your more recent books. But for our audience, for us, for that matter, can you give us somewhat of a bio and maybe even an origin story? You know, who is Dr. Jeff Myers? Are you married? Do you have children? Where do you live? You know, how did it come to all this? How do we get here?
Yeah, thanks, Elisha. Well, my wife, Stephanie, and I live in Colorado, and I have 4 adult children, and they're all, 3 of them are here in Colorado. One is in Arizona. They're all off in their vocations. One works for a roofing company. One works with horses. One is a helicopter pilot, and one is works in cybersecurity. So it's an interesting season of life being empty nesters. We're at home with our dog, Clive, who's named after Clive Staples Lewis, C.S. Lewis. That's how nerdy I am. And my origin story really started, I was born in Detroit. When I was a little kid there were riots. The entire city fell apart, and it stayed falling apart for decades. It was a rough way to grow up. I was offered hard drugs for the first time at 7 years of age. My parents finally thought, you know what, our job opportunities here are fantastic, but this is not worth it. So they moved back to their roots. My parents are from Kansas and Oklahoma. So we moved to Great Bend, Kansas, joined a little tiny church there, which I loved. I loved the people. I loved the way they cared for us. We knew that we were loved, but their path to faith did not go through a lot of the street level debates about whether there is a God, whether God is actually good, whether the world is created rather than that it evolved, all those kinds of things that I was curious about. So I decided essentially that when I graduate from high school, I'm going to graduate from church, which is the experience of probably 70% of young adults. Can you imagine that? 70% of young adults, according to Lifeway, who are significantly involved in church in their high school years. Okay, these are the kids praying, raising their hands, leading worship, leading other kids to Christ, leading Bible studies. 70% of them are no longer even attending church by the time they reach their mid-20s. And I was going to be one of those statistics. But my parents had heard about this program called Summit Ministries. They arranged for me to attend. All they needed to tell me was it was in Colorado, in Manitou Springs, Colorado, which we had been there on vacation. I love that town. I thought it would be great to go back. So I found out the program was designed to help young adults find answers to all their tough questions. It was sort of like an American version for young adults of what Francis Schaeffer did with L'Abri in Switzerland. So I went in, found the director, David Noble. I said, I hope you have a lot of answers because I have a lot of questions. And he said to me, hey, we aren't afraid of questions at Summit. And I realized instantly I'd found my tribe. Through the Summit experience, I came to a personal faith in Jesus, and it literally changed the course of my life. So now here we are all of these years later, and I've had the privilege to receive the baton of leadership from David Noble and lead this ministry over the last 14 years. And we've just been standing in awe and amazement as God has spread this work all over the world. When I was attending Summit, I think there were 35 students in my program. This year, in our intensive programs, we will reach in our intensive programs and the curriculum courses that we have developed, we will reach 70,000 young people.
Wow.
So it's phenomenal to watch God work. And we really see God doing something in this rising generation. They've been given a trust. They're interested in stewarding it, especially among young men. We're seeing a revival of truth and a desire to live faithful lives to Jesus. It's just a little bit, but it only takes a little bit. You know, when you look at social movements, you realize if just 3% of the population gets on board with something, they can tip the entire population. So it's a privilege to get to watch that and see that. So a lot of what we do at Summit Ministries, in addition to the programs and the courses that we offer, is we try to help people identify what are the big problems that they see in society that are almost impossible to deal with from a biblical worldview, and then we tackle those. And this year's project is on transgender, which I think is how we made the connection for your show.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I guess just backstory, because that's really intriguing to me. I first discovered you because I was at a workshop for young Christians. It was like a leadership seminar. It wasn't put on by Summit, but you were a guest speaker. This was in Texas. And I can remember how everything you presented resonated with me as I think 17 or 18-year-old, young man at the time. I'm curious, and this isn't to try to date you or anything like that, but if we could go back to when you first went to Summit, and you can maybe say the date that was, till here we are in 2025. If you can kind of identify major themes that the culture was going through, right? Because you've had this privilege of seeing crops of young adults that are eager to grow in their faith and combat cultural lies. Can you kind of point to there being these themes since the time you started, or is it kind of always been the same themes? Has there been some diversity?
That's a fascinating question, Elisha. I can't wait to hear what I have to say.
Nice.
Now, so I came to the Summit Ministries program in the 1980s.
Okay.
The program was actually formed in 1962. So the oldest graduates of Summit Ministries are now in their 80s. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of wisdom expanding across all these generations. That initial generation coming through Summit Ministries, we now call the baby boom generation. My generation is Gen X. After my generation, Gen Y, but most people call them the millennials. And then the generation we work with currently, Gen Z. There is another generation rising. They're old. The oldest of them are now in their teens, early teens, 12, 13 years of age. We're calling them Gen Alpha. We reached the end of the alphabet, so I guess we start all over again. The challenges are unique to each generation, and one way you can tell the difference is by how each generation accesses technology. So the baby boom generation, computers were a tool that you used to reach a business objective. There weren't personal applications. Very, very few people, unless they had a video gaming system, which is different, had a computer at home to try to achieve their personal goals. Gen X came up. Computers were still kind of a tool, but we brought them into our homes. PCs became a big part of the way we operated. The millennial generation began to use mobile technology. So the technology was no longer from the workplace to the home. Now it was everywhere. It was omnipresent. Gen Z we think of as the smartphone generation. Gen Alpha coming up. If Gen Z is the smartphone generation, Gen Alpha is the AI generation. all kinds of implications flowing from that. We should probably do a whole separate show on that sometime. But so the technology affects not just how we access information in the world, it affects how we think about the world. So for instance, even when I was getting my doctorate, I was up at the University of Denver. We had a great library at my university, but we didn't have all the resources. So I'd have to drive up to Boulder, to the University of Colorado, to get resources from the library. I tell students that, they're like, why would you ever even have to leave your couch to get information? It doesn't make any sense to them. But I had to learn to be patient. I had to learn to go find things. Sometimes there would be a book that I needed. None of our libraries in the entire state of Colorado would have it. That's crazy. So they'd have to order it for me, and I'd have to wait for 2 weeks for that book to come. I had to cultivate patience in order to fulfill my curiosity. Now, people don't have to cultivate patience. All of the answers they need, they can get instantly. They can get an AI overview on anything, from a review of a product to a question they're asking that they're trying to research for a paper. And along the way, we've trained ourselves to expect immediate answers. John Eldredge, you're familiar with the work of John Eldredge?
Yeah.
He's here in Colorado, he's very philosophical, very thoughtful. He recently wrote a book that where he says, look, you have been discipled by the internet to expect immediate answers on everything. He said the church fathers would have been horrified by this because they believed that the waiting, the patience, cultivated your soul. There's a difference in the way people think based on the way they use technology. That's probably the biggest distinctive in the different generations. When I was younger, I think there are a lot of things that are so much better. The young adults I work with now, they drink a lot less. They have a lot less premarital sex. They use a lot less, they don't smoke cigarettes. It's just, there are things that are better than when I was a kid. But one thing that is different with the young adults I work with now is that they have come to, in a way, they see their faith as a self-serving thing. Like they say, okay, God, here's our deal. I will be good. You don't hurt me because I need to be safe. This is the goal of my life. I need to be safe. I need a friction-free life. That is a tendency in this generation that never even occurred to me and to people I knew growing up. It leads to a kind of self-focus. And that self-focus leads people to think that even things like truth depend on me. So people stopped saying, I seek the truth, and started saying, I speak my truth. All of a sudden, that applies to everything in life. And it's not accidental. There is an actual agenda behind this. And the agenda is we need to either abolish God or make people think that God's very existence is irrelevant to anything that is important. So what do you have to do if that's your goal? Well, you have to tear down all categories of meaning. There have to be no categories of meaning that exist independent of our ability to perceive them. And I don't mean to just sound like a philosopher there. Freedom has to be whatever you want it to be. Justice has to be whatever you want it to be. Truth has to be whatever you want it to be. Gender has to be whatever you want it to be. Because at the end of the day, you can say, well, your idea of freedom is different from my idea of freedom, but we have male and female. And it just isn't about secondary sex characteristics. There are 6,500 biological differences between males and females. If you want to succeed in getting people to think that there is no God or God's existence is irrelevant to anything that is important, you have to tear down the idea that God designed gender and he designed it for our good. So that has led to a way of thinking about the world that we're spending a lot of time with our students and with their parents and the teachers and pastors who help them deal with.
I want to jump in here really quick and let you know that we are still running our back to school campaign over at Voteberg Music Academy. So if you're looking to get any of your children started in fiddle, guitar, piano, mandolin, ukulele, go check the link below and find a course that's right for you. At Voberg Music Academy, you pay one monthly subscription and get weekly lessons, live coaching calls, access to our community, access to our badge system and rank system, our quarterly challenges and competitions that we run. And here's the deal. You can sign up with one membership and have all your kids partake with that one membership. We're all about the families doing this together. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for you to not just afford it, but also participate as a family in Voberg Music Academy. So check the link below and we hope to see you over there.
Wow. Yeah, that's just so much. Just that walks through the generations. Thank you so much. And in speaking specifically to gender, so this has been this ongoing progression, right? And this ongoing desire to tear down what God has designed and ordained to be good. How has that progression looked specifically with gender over the past few generations? How have we gotten to where we are at now?
When I was at graduate school in the University of Denver, this is in the 1990s, people were beginning to articulate aloud something that had kind of come about in the 70s, but it was seen as very offbeat, suspicious. But by the 1990s, people began to accept it. And what they said is, well, gender is different than sex. Sex is your biology. Gender is a social construction. Gender is how you act based on the way you think other people think somebody of your gender should act. So the term gender, and this happened in the 1970s. A guy named John Money from Johns Hopkins University said, well, gender is how you feel about your sex, not your sex. So that idea began to take shape in the 1990s. It was uncomfortable. It was weird, but it sort of went by the wayside for quite a long time. And then starting in the, probably 2012, 13, 14, somewhere in there, it burst out into public and continued to grow in influence to the point where young adults today are 1,600% more likely than people in their 50s to say that they identify as transgender. Now think about that for a second. 1,600% more likely. It is so pervasive that in various surveys, up to 39% of young adults say they identify as LGBTQ, up from, say, 2% in my generation. Obviously, something happened. And it wasn't just people realizing some truth. There was some kind of agenda that grabbed their hearts and minds. There's something that changed. And that is something that everybody has to think about. Now, I know a lot of people who are watching or listening, you're like, that's exactly why I'm homeschooling my kids, because they're teaching all that junk in the public school and we're not doing it. We're not doing it in our family. Well, it's good for you. Good on you to do that. But you're still going to have to deal with it because your child will have a friend, or at least a friend of a friend, or there will be a relative or a grandchild who struggles with this. Recently spoke to a grandmother who was, for all of her life, significantly involved in one of America's most prominent youth ministries. And she said 5 of my 13 grandchildren identify as transgender. I had a student who was an engineer. She told me, she was very upset. She said, as soon as I announced that I wanted to be an engineer, everybody in my class started telling me, well, I think you're actually a boy trapped in a girl's body. My own daughter's a helicopter pilot. If she grew up today, undoubtedly she would be told, well, clearly, if you're in a 99% male-dominated field, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. All of those things are part of this agenda to try to take normal struggles that human beings face and turn them into something that ultimately breaks down any final sense that we can know anything to be true at all. And that's dangerous for your kids. Because if you can teach a kid to look at a boy or a girl and say there is no difference, then you can propagandize them to believe anything. We as parents need to be proactive. And that's why Dr. Kathy Koch and I wrote this new book called Raising Gender Confident Kids. We see it as a preemptive strike to help families deal with this before it becomes a problem. And if it already has become a problem, to help walk alongside you to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, many people like my wife, like Katie and I, are trying to be proactive in our own way. And we're seeing what curriculum is brought into the public schools or just out into the public space in general. And we're saying, we don't want to have anything to do with that. We're going to bring our children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord with a Christian education. And I'm so glad you said we're not immune to this, right? It's coming for us. And I'm curious as to how we as parents can approach this conversation in a way that I'll just speak for myself. I think that I think it was Corrie ten Boom that always had or Boom that said, she wanted to learn about sex, and her dad said, well, hey, that's too heavy for you now. Pick up the suitcase. Remember that story? And I've kind of
great story.
Right. Great story. But I've thought, okay, well, how long do we continue telling our children, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. The suitcase is too heavy for you, because I do want to be the person that's a confidant for my children in the most sensitive issues, in the most personal issues. And so how do we use discernment as parents to be proactive in these conversations with our children? First, acknowledging the fact that we can't protect them forever, right? They are going to get access to internet. They're going to hear these terms and want to go Google search them themselves, or they're going to see something on there. Maybe you don't give your kids a phone, but they're going to come across kids that do have phones. And so kind of acknowledging that fact and then being conscientious in pursuing these conversations with our kids. Do you have any insight how we can navigate that as parents?
Yeah, thanks, Elisha. I'm going to dig into this. I will answer the question, but I also want everybody who's watching or listening to know this book, because of a donor, is being made available to your family for free. So you just go to genderconfidentkids.com, and the book that we're going to be talking about, you can just order it, have it sent to your house. If you have a little extra money and you can pay it forward to somebody else to get the book for free, do that. But this is our gift to you, because we in the book, Dr. Kathy Koch, my co-author, and I have literally 200 conversation starters for every aspect of what you're going to face with the transgender agenda with your kids. Wow. It is going to happen. It's going to come up. Your child is going to go to the store. They're going to come home and ask, why was that bearded man wearing a dress? Okay. And you're going to have to deal with it. So what do you do? How do you handle that? I suspect that it's different for elementary, middle school, and high school kids. So for elementary kids, they're just observing everything. They see everything, don't they? It's so irritating. There's nothing escapes their notice. So you might as well figure out ahead of time what you're going to say. And if you say, well, don't look at that, or don't stare, that's good manners. But what do you do when they say, well, I don't understand. I mean, that man clearly had a beard, but he had a makeup like a girl, was wearing a dress, walked like a girl. What is going on? Why is that person doing that? You need to be prepared to say, okay, look, kiddo, here's, about sin. We talk about this at our house, that human beings are in a place where without Jesus, we can be far from God. And when we're far from God, we get really confused about what we should be doing in our lives. And some people get so confused that they can't even become clear about whether they're a boy or a girl. And that's really sad, isn't it? It's really tragic that happens for people, and we feel sorry for them. We want to be kind to those people because God made them in his image and he gave them dignity. But he also wants them to know that the way he made them is good. And you, little girl, God made you as a girl on purpose. And he is delighted in the design that he gave to you. He made you as a girl. He made you good. And son, he made you as a boy. And someday, as a boy, you're going to grow up and you're going to become a man. And my vision for you is that you become the kind of man who can stand for truth, even when people don't like it, and that you will identify the evil that is happening around you and you'll act to stop it, that you'll stand up against evil and injustice, that you will be that kind of man in your life. One of my sons, when he was little, had a bad dream, and he asked me to pray with him. And so I just prayed, God, help him dream about puppies and kittens and birds. And his eyes flew open and he said, birds aren't nice. I was struck to my core because I realized I wasn't praying to God on his behalf. I was trying to psych him into having good dreams. I said, son, I'm really sorry. Can I start over? And he nodded. And I said, son, this is what I'm going to pray for you. And I put my hand on his head and I said, Heavenly Father, you're the almighty, righteous God, the King of the universe. And I pray that this very night you would begin working in my son's mind and heart to turn him into a warrior for you. That he would be mighty, that he would be the kind of boy who stands against what is wrong. He stands for the people who are vulnerable and stands against the bullies. And that when he has these dreams, that you, Heavenly Father, would help him realize that through you, he conquers. And the bad dream stopped. And that kid became the defender of the helpless. He's an EMT, trained to be a firefighter right now. That's literally what God has called him to do with his life. And, I don't think it's all just one prayer. Obviously, it's a whole way of life. But hopefully that illustrates that we can address what is happening in the culture and then turn around and address what is that fear in the heart of our kid. That maybe I was born in the wrong body. No, you weren't. God's design is good. He made you just the way he wanted you to be. And you don't have to fit any kind of a stereotype. You don't have to be a G.I. Joe. You don't have to be a Barbie. You just be you. God made you the way he did, and it's good.
Wow.
Yeah, just in that last point, thank you for everything you just said, but you said you don't have to fit into these stereotypes as a G.I. Joe or a Barbie. You've talked about how that is oftentimes kind of the seed that's planted in young people's minds. Maybe they don't fit a physical description of what they see the ideal being, and they're teased for it, they're made fun of it for it, and they're able to go find answers. They're going to Google something. Why is my body this way? Why do I feel this way? Why am I not accepted by these people? And you've shared before kind of like what happens when just anyone goes and Googles, what is transgenderism? And it's not a biblically balanced answer when people, and I say Google or really any search engine, you go to any search engine and what comes as a result when people do that?
Well, Kathy and I did that as we were preparing for the book and doing our research. We just typed in the word transgender. I think we were 5 pages deep in the search results before we found even one link that was even remotely questioning of the transgender agenda. Most people never look beyond the first 3 or 4 search results. They never look beyond the first page. If you only looked at the first page, there are several things. First of all, you're being told, here are the facts about transgender. You go to the site, it's all a lie, 100% lie, but it says, here are the facts. The second one says, here's how to get cross-sex hormones without your parents knowing about it. Here is a clinic where we will treat you without telling your parents. Here's a law firm that will help you learn how to legally separate from your parents who don't identify with your transgender identity. Those are the kinds of results that you will get. So any child who goes to a search engine to try to figure out what this whole transgender thing is immediately and instantly going to be indoctrinated. Now, if they're in a school, it's far worse, far worse. Half the schools in the United States of America, including half the schools in the state of Idaho. I mean, Idaho's a conservative place, but it's not immune from this. They teach gender ideology. Many of the schools are so into this that if a child says, I'm coming out as transgender, they literally roll out a red carpet down the hallway and the child walks down it and all the other children stand on the sides and cheer for them. They play music. For a child who doesn't feel like they fit in, you can see that's just pure poison for their soul, right? Because they say, all I have to do to be instantly popular and accepted with my peers is say that I'm transgender. And then they begin making decisions that make it very, very hard for them to back away from that commitment. So that's what a lot of young adults face. And it's, and if you think Google is bad, Instagram is far worse and TikTok it's unreal.
Wow. Yeah, that's a sobering thought for us as parents. Because like I said, I don't want to be naive to think that, I know everything that my child's seen on the internet. I know everything he's hearing. Like I would be the first parent in the history of the world that knew everything that's going on, in my children's private life and what they're battling in their thoughts. you've spoken to different ways that we can encourage children that have some of these tendencies that have maybe been deemed as being contrary to their sex or their gender, right? You already brought up the engineer or the helicopter pilot. You even mentioned in your book, a boy that's good. You call it, I think, the different smarts. Is that what you call them in the book?
Mhm.
And you'll see a boy that's maybe has a proclivity towards poetry and being good with words. And in my day and age, if you were into Shakespeare, then you were called gay, you were called a girl. But you said, no, look at David, and that's just a biblical example. There's other examples in the history of the church post Bible time where there are men that are warriors that are embracing their masculinity. And they also embrace these, traits that have oftentimes be deemed as feminine, or what, like I said, you're being called gay or something like that. Can you kind of speak to that and how we can identify those in our children and help help use those things to actually encourage them in their gender?
Let me do that, Elisha, by first of all pointing out what the central lie is behind the transgender agenda. It's the idea of the gender spectrum. Earlier, I mentioned G.I. Joe and Barbie. But gender ideology is literally based on the idea that gender is a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have extreme masculinity. On the other end of the spectrum, you have extreme femininity. G.I. Joe, Barbie. Since none of us are G.I. Joe or Barbie, we're all more toward the middle. We are non-binary. So everybody is transgender. 100% of the people are transgender, except for the G.I. Joes or the Barbies. And we ignore those people. In fact, there's actually a name. It's become a pejorative, a curse word essentially, and it's cisgender. If you don't identify as transgender, you're cisgender. Nobody wants to be cisgender. We were with a family recently, and their daughter said, I had to be moved to a new school. Well, why? Because she said I was the only girl left in my class. What do you mean you're the only girl left in your class? All the other girls said they were boys trapped in girls' bodies. All of them said they were transgender, they were transitioning. So this is something that people face. But there isn't a spectrum. We have a male spectrum. Well, there's a male spectrum and there's a female spectrum. But the research in biology, in psychology, in psychiatry, all is demonstrating that the most tomboyish girl has more in common with the most feminine girl than she does with the least masculine boy. So you just think of male and female as separate kinds, or genus, gender. That's the way we use the term gender. The biblical ideas of kinds. There are different kinds of birds, there are different kinds of cats, but there are only two kinds of humans, male and female. And you see that from Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. They're male and female. So we recognize that a boy who is playing football, shouldn't feel bad if he also wants to do ballet. It can be perfectly normal. A boy who plays violin can also get involved in competitive, sport or something else. We just need to break down this idea that if you're a boy and you pursue anything that you think girls enjoy, that's somehow you're not a boy anymore. And same for girls. Some 80% of girls say when they were younger, they felt like a tomboy. 80%. It has nothing to do with being a boy trapped in a girl's body. It just has to do with the fact that God made you with a body to move and to climb and to explore and do all kinds of fun things, just like boys do. But that's the core thing. I think if we can help our kids understand, no, God made you as a boy. Some boys like to draw pictures. Some boys like to run. Some girls like to run. Some girls like to bake. Some boys like to, if you break down those stereotypes and you realize, no, it has nothing to do with it. One of the things that we try to point out in the book, and again, you just go to genderconfidentkids.com, you'll see the book. We're going to give it to everybody for free, Raising Gender Confident Kids. But you're also going to see a lot of other resources there where we address some of these things. The harmony between males and females helps us understand why God made us to be different. And I don't know if you want me to go into that, but I'm happy.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do.
Okay, so think about stress for a minute. When males and females experience stress, something different happens in their bodies. When females experience stress, their bodies upregulate neoepinephrine, which makes them more sensitive and thoughtful. When women say, yeah, when I'm experiencing stress, I just ruminate on something. That's what's going on. There's a chemical reaction in your brain upregulating neoepinephrine. Males, when they're under stress, their bodies upregulate dopamine, which causes them to immediately move into action. There is no cross function here. It is always observed with females that one way and always observed with males the other way. Well, think about being under stress. If you're under stress and all you do is ruminate, that's not good. But if you're under stress and all you do is immediately move into action without thinking, that's not good either. That God literally designed males and females to need each other to appropriately respond to stress. The way we see the world is different. There are two kinds of retinal cells, rods and cones. Males have a preponderance of rods, a lot more, like 30% more. Females have a preponderance of cones, like 30% more. Rods are the kinds of cells that focus on contrast and motion. Cones are the kinds of cells that focus on color and texture. If you want to accurately see the world, you have to see contrast, motion, color, and texture, that God literally designed males and females to need each other to accurately see the world. Those are some examples of things where the difference that God made us in his good design actually helps us harmonize with other people who are very different from ourselves for the good of the world.
I love how you brought up the spectrums. Going back to that real quick, are female. There's a female spectrum, but it's all female. And then there's the male spectrum, and it's all male. And so trying to put us all on the same spectrum of humanity, I think that really can help simplify things in people's brains. But something else too. So this is something that I've wondered, because we haven't come in contact with a lot of this right now. Our kids are very young and they are home with us or with like-minded people like 90% of the time. So I think my fear has been, do I introduce this before the world introduces it? It's one thing if you see someone in the grocery store or something like that, that has happened. But at what point do you proactively introduce stuff without, I guess my fear would be putting concerns or fears in their heads that aren't there? What is that balance, or what has your research suggested?
So for elementary children, I tend to, I might have a question. I ask, have you, I saw something in the news, and does this ever happen? Do you ever see this in people you know? Mm-hmm. One homeschool dad, we were talking about it, and he said, yeah, my kid's 5, my son, and he's on this little basketball team. And another one of the kids said, well, if you're a boy, you can become a girl. Like, this is a homeschool family, and they're just playing basketball, and this conversation comes up. So it sometimes happens at that early age. If it does, I gave an answer earlier about how you want to show compassion, express the dignity of all people, but also help your kids understand, man, a lot of people are confused. And this is a bad world that we live in, where people end up sometimes feeling like they should be rewarded for being confused. But I want you to know this is true about you, and then share your vision. With middle school kids, it's going to be a more important conversation because they're going through puberty. And puberty is for every human being who's ever lived, is probably the most awkward thing that ever happens to them. And they will naturally feel out of sorts with their body. So it's a really important thing to be able to, and I think girls probably go through this more. I had 2 daughters and 2 sons. When a girl, in middle school, her body begins to develop faster than the boys, and she might experience teasing because of it. And she might, depending on her situation, she might actually feel rejecting of the changes in her body, to help her know, now God is turning you from a little girl into a woman. And as this happens, there are times where you're going to feel really awkward. Everybody who has ever lived feels awkward. It does not mean that you were born in the wrong body. It is instead a grace from God that he's giving you the opportunity to grow in character, so that when you become a woman, that you're a woman after God's heart. Or when you become a man, son, that you're a man after God's heart. One girl, woman we talked to, and she was reflecting on her experience when she was younger. She said, "Yeah, I had frizzy hair, I wore glasses and had braces, and I always envied the little cute cheerleader girl in my Sunday school class." But she said, a very wise mentor said to me, an older woman, "Look, someday you're going to figure out what to do with your hair. You're going to lose the braces, and you're going to get contacts. And when you do, what you have developed during this time of your life, your character, that's with you forever." What a wise thing to say to a young woman who feels awkward. The high school conversation has more to do with vocation. What am I supposed to do with my life? And so helping your children navigate those questions about purpose in life and vocation and what you should study, what God's leading you to be interested in, and how to connect with other people who are interested in other kinds of things. Now, my kids are at a point where they're all in a career. There are going to be times where they might be full-time at home with kids. But the idea is I've encouraged them to strengthen their minds as much as they can, because you're always going to be a better parent if you've worked hard to learn the kinds of things that you're homeschooling your kids to have to learn. So that's been our unique approach. Right? Now, maybe it's not unique, but that's been our approach.
Yeah, well, I think
Thank
that's
you.
really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the way you broke that down. I'm curious, and maybe this, we can wrap it up with this, because I know you said you've got a classroom full of hungry and eager students. But where can listeners find more from you? I know we've already referenced the book a handful of times, and that website where people can get this most recent book for free. But can you just, in closing, kind of share more about Summit Ministries? Who are your programs for? What are the programs that you offer? Is this all geographically, tied to Colorado? Are there other places that you guys go? Can you kind of give us a 30,000 foot view of that and who this program's for?
Yes, of course. And I will mention the website again, because I know people are busy while they're listening, but genderconfidentkids.com is the website where you can get the Raising Gender Confident Kids book, helping your boys grow into godly men, your girls grow into godly women. We're just going to step by step walk with you through all the tricky things that happen in the culture and how to talk about them in a way that's very natural for kids. But then we would love to help you later on when your kids are 16 to 22 years of age. I'd encourage you to prayerfully consider having them attend one of Summit Ministries' programs. They're 12 days long. We have them in Manitou Springs, Colorado, Lookout Mountain, Georgia. Those are our two locations. Young adults come. We bring to them the top Christian thought leaders who love Jesus and all kinds of issues. My co-author, Dr. Kathy Koch, is over right now teaching the students about those 8 great smarts, how everybody is smart. You might not be logic smart, but you might be art smart or body smart. And everybody's got some smart. So she's over teaching that to the students at this moment. They're also learning apologetics from Dr. Sean McDowell, Dr. Frank Turek, J. Warner Wallace, the author of Cold Case Christianity. They're also learning about holy sexuality from Dr. Christopher Yuan. They're learning Bible from Dr. Matt Jones from Colorado Christian University. They're learning about marriage and family from John Stone Street from the Colson Center. So these are the kinds of instructors who are in these programs helping students not only beef up on their biblical worldview, but also form lifelong friendships and small groups, one-on-one mentoring. There's one adult in our program for every 5 students. So it's very intensive, very personal, and very growth enhancing. 95% of the students, by the time they leave the program, say they embrace a biblical worldview. And even 10 years later, 85% say they're 85 to 90%. It's actually going up, even 10 years later, who say, yeah, I'm still strong with Jesus. I'm still strong with a biblical worldview. So we're very, very excited about that. We'd encourage you to check that out. If you've got a homeschool co-op, you can also get involved. We've got curriculum for kindergarten through grade 12, teaching biblical worldview. Yes, the littles can think through all of this stuff. They understand way more than you think. Most of our children, by the time they finish 6th grade going through our courses, they have more theology than their parents do, because they've really studied it. And kids, don't ever underestimate what a child can understand. They are being equipped by God at this moment, not so that when they're 40, they can reach the world, but so that every moment of life they can testify to God's goodness.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And just thank you so much for your time, Dr. Myers, and just all the work that you're doing on a variety of I guess, different topics. Blessings to you. And just again, I encourage all of our listeners to go get this book and check out any other resources.
We will have a link in the description too.
Yeah, that'll be
Good. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know. I was like, you were doing a good job with the
Yeah, because I always
verbal
think,
link,
oh, well,
but
when am I listening to one of these? I'm out for a walk or I'm driving.
yes,
I'm not
yes.
going to be able to write that down.
I'm a big
I
link
just say it
clicker
over and
after
over
that.
again. That's genderconfidentkids.com.
Yeah.
So we will have that description. Thank you so much for that generous offer. I know that our audience is going to really enjoy reading more about this book. And I think those questions are phenomenal too, to be able to start those conversations. And we want to be having more of those conversations with our kids. So,
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm so excited for you guys. Thank you for having the show. And thank you for the ministry that you've gotten. For everybody who's watching or listening right now, this is a tricky thing. And if you think, oh, wow, I should have done this differently, or I wish I'd known this 5 years ago, don't beat yourself up. Guilt and shame, just let it go. What we do from this point forward, though, can change. And that's the focus.
Awesome. Thank you so much for leaving us with that. Thank you again, and blessings. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.